I will keep this as short as possible, but I want to share a weird experience of mine. If nothing comes of this, I will be fine, but I'm just wondering if anyone else out there has a different perspective to my own. It happened when I used to work in a convenience store. I used to work a late night shift. In fact, I used to know the regulars, some on a first name basis. One of these regulars is who this story is about. One night, I got slid a piece of paper from one of the regulars. In case it matters, I'm a guy, and this regular was a female. On the piece of paper I was handed contained her contact information. Well, our store had a strict no contact rule, so I didn't do anything with her number. I just ignored it. I guess I was flattered, but overall I found it pretty inappropriate. She was older, quite a bit older. Nice though she was, I didn't feel great about getting her private information. It didn't stop her from coming to our store. She was still a regular. Over a period of a couple of weeks, I noticed a change in her demeanor though. Her behavior started to change. I guess it was probably down to the fact that I didn't contact her. She came to the store more often than usual, and seemed to spend more and more time browsing than usual. It got to the point where I would see her when I clocked in, and she would be in and out until I finished my shift. At this point, I would just like to point out once again that I was on the night shift, so this woman would turn up when it was dark and effectively leave when it was bright out. She didn't buy anything, she just stood there glaring at me, and if I looked her way or met her gaze, she would look away, but then straight back once she knew I was looking in a different direction. It felt like she was watching me. She was watching me. As if she was there to keep an eye on me. I hated the way she would just wander around the store without buying anything. I hated feeling her eyes on me. Our manager pushed the whole "the customer's always right" message, but I had just about as much as I could stand. That woman, and the way she stared and loitered, was too much. I was uncomfortable, so I asked the manager to ban her from the store, and thankfully, he agreed. I watched the ban happen live. I was there in the store when she was banned. She took it better than I imagined. She just stood there and listened. She remained calm, and when the manager was done with his speech, she left quietly. I thought that I had just gotten away with dealing with a difficult situation, but little did I know, I hadn't. On my next night shift, she just turned up and started peering at me from outside of the windows. She wouldn't enter the store, but everywhere I went, I felt as if her eyes were on me. Even though she was physically not allowed to enter, it felt as if she had never left. I might be sounding a bit dramatic, but honestly, if you have never been in my shoes, you would find it incredibly distracting, if not scary, to have someone stare at you throughout your night shift. When it was cold out, and the windows of our store were fogged, I knew she was still out there, because I could feel her eyes on me. It was at this point I realized that she was someone that I should be wary of. That feeling of wariness slowly turned into a feeling of fear. I was scared of seeing her. I used to walk home from the night shift and just be so nervous that I would run into her. Then that fear turned into a reality. She would approach and try to strike up conversations with me, pretending that she had just run into me out of the blue. What a coincidence. Saying how it was such a coincidence that we were walking the same way home. I used to walk in circles until she gave up walking with me, just so she didn't know where I lived. In the meantime, I was proactive. I was trying to get transferred to work at a different store. I finally got a switch to a different store, in the same chain of convenience store I worked for. It was a little further away, but I didn't really mind. Sorry, but that's kind of it. I didn't run into her again. And nothing else really came of it. I know some of you must be thinking that I should have called the cops or done something else, but the rules in Japan are very blurry when the topic of stalking is mentioned. The cops aren't really interested unless something has happened. I should have probably spotted the signs earlier, I guess, but at least I'll know for next time. although I hope there isn't a next time. It was a really creepy experience, and in the new store, I was constantly looking out of the windows expecting to see her. Those longer walks home, those were scary too. I thought that she could be anywhere. This happened when I was in high school. I used to have to go to these after-school classes that my mum planned. I hated it at the time, but now I get why she was making me do it, now that I'm older. Sometimes on the way home from cram school, I would be asked to pick up a couple of items from the convenience store, everyday kind of things. I ended up going in there every now and then, just out of habit. I read the magazines and the manga, and just looked around to break up the evening a little. I mean, I wasn't ever in a rush to head home to start my homework. I was heading down the street as usual, and then I heard the thunder of footsteps coming down the street behind me. I thought to myself, oh, I forgot the change at the register or something. Hi, Jay here, and this actually happens a lot in Japan. If you forget the change or try to tip, you will likely be chased down the street by a staff member, eager to give you your money back. Happened to me once. I accidentally left a 10 yen coin on the table in a restaurant and someone chased after me to give it back. Back to the story. But then I realized something. I didn't buy anything, I was just looking around. My next thought was, oh God, did they suspect me of stealing something? In my mind, I decided that I hadn't done anything wrong, so I assumed that the clerk was running down the road for a different reason. But no, I was wrong. She wanted to speak to me. The clerk was female, and she ushered me back to the store by pleading and apologizing. I didn't know what was happening, and I was a high school kid, so I just thought I'd better do what she said. I didn't want to be in trouble. We went through to a back room of the convenience store, some kind of staff room, and she said, "Sorry about this, but I saw something, and I just couldn't live with myself if I let you go without telling you." So I was sat down in the staff room, and I had little other choice but to listen. I can't remember everything, so I'll just try to give you the bullet points of what she said. She said that she had seen something on one of the security monitors. She said she saw a ghostly apparition appear behind me on the monitor. She said that apparition then appeared right in front of me and appeared to be beckoning me through the door and out of the store. She said she saw that ghost or whatever it was start violently beckoning when I was walking out of the door. According to her, it was dragging me outside. She was scared that something terrible was going to happen to me. I really had no idea how I should take that news. My immediate thoughts were, can I go home? I just want to go home. You know, stuff like that. So I just nodded along and tried to feign a serious look of contemplation. I guess that I'm not that great of an actor though, because the clerk then held onto my arm. She must have seen the doubt on my face or something. She kept telling me to listen to her and to believe her. I started to get really scared. Not of what she was warning me about, but scared of her. She wouldn't let me go, and I didn't know what to do. On top of all this, she was really attractive, so I was mega confused as an adolescent boy. I ended up agreeing with her and just accepting her version of events. Though she was pretty, she had a very scary intensity about her, and I wanted out as soon as possible. Well, I don't know what to make of all that. I guess that if something was beckoning me or trying to lure me, then it hasn't worked. I haven't experienced any form of paranormal activity. The only thing that scared me about that day was the way the clerk acted. I mean, to chase a high school kid down the street just to try and convince them that a ghost was following them was, what can I say, a very unique experience.
I used to work nights at 7-Eleven in countryside Saitama, Japan. I won't say exactly where, but Saitama is pretty much the same all over, just with more or less people. Being in the countryside, mine had less people, mainly nuisance biker kids stopping for cigarettes or people just heading home. But there was one customer whose memory will haunt me forever. As I said, my 7-Eleven was in the countryside, so it was basically the brightest thing as far as the eye could see at night. It was a quiet weekday night, I think Wednesday or Thursday. Working nights, I always found those 2 days tended to blur together the most. No one had come in for over an hour. I'd done all of my nighttime duties for basically the whole night. I was working alone, as I often did, since the volume of traffic at night in this location could never justify paying another person. I was lazily wiping the counter for the 3rd or 4th time that night, just listening to the cicadas and crickets outside. I was so focused on my work that I didn't even notice the figure at the window staring in. I jumped in surprise upon seeing him and did a polite nod. It was a wrinkly old man with kinda dead-looking eyes. Unusually, he did not return my greeting gesture. He just kept staring in at me. It was like 3 a.m. What was this old man who was pushing at least 75 years old, and I'm being generous here, doing out so late? It's not unheard of, I supposed, but he wasn't actually doing anything apart from staring at me. I was starting to get really creeped out. Outside the store was dark and quiet, and I hadn't seen any customers in over an hour. Actually, I hadn't even seen any cars pass the store in that long either. Then, another thought occurred to me. There were no cars in the car park. There weren't really any houses nearby either. Was this a ghost? I didn't really believe in ghosts, but I couldn't really think of anything else. But he was solid looking. The longer he stared at me, the more I felt creeped out. Actually, more than that, I was starting to panic. I came to a decision, and I'm not really proud of it. I figured if he wasn't in the store, he wasn't a customer. Therefore, wasn't my responsibility. So I pulled the blind down on the window he was staring from. My hand was shaking as I did so. I was mere centimeters away from his face. He held my gaze the whole time. He looked directly into my eyes, and I couldn't look away. The old guy didn't move, even a little. Being so close to him, I felt all the hairs on the back of my neck stand up on end, and my stomach was tying itself in knots. I did see his chest move up and down, however, so he wasn't a ghost. After I had closed the blind, I went back to the counter and stood there, uneasily. I really didn't know what to do. It felt so strange just leaving him out there, but my mind was racing and I just couldn't think clearly. What was I meant to do? I even briefly considered turning the lights off, but then I snapped out of it and realized how ridiculous I was being. The creepiness of the situation had put my mind in a panic and I wasn't thinking straight. I then realized that I must go and see if he needed help. I mustered the courage, went to the front window, and raised the blinds once more. He was still there, but his eyes were somewhat bigger now. We were locked in a staring contest that I couldn't look away from. This went on for what seemed like forever. His eyes seemed to keep getting bigger too. Then, something happened to break the standoff. The old man slowly brought his head to the glass. Softly at first, but as time went on, harder and harder. Now I had to do something. I ran out and tried to stop the man. He was stronger than I expected, and he continued to hit the window with his head again and again. So I tried harder to stop him, but I didn't want to hurt him. I managed to stop him for a brief moment, and then he did the unimaginable. He started to yell. Just a continuous, unintelligible sound. The longer I held on, the louder he got until it reached a scream. This was a battle I was not going to win. I ran inside and called the police with him still bellowing outside. I tried to explain as best I could, but was extremely shaken up. Luckily, the operator could hear the screaming on the other end. The police came 15 minutes later and seemed to be familiar with the man. They calmed him down and loaded him into their patrol car. They took him away without really explaining anything to me. About half an hour later, they came back and explained to me that the old man lived in a care facility about 10 minutes away by car, which meant that it was about 30 to 40 minutes on foot for the old man. Before his mental deterioration, he actually used to live in a house where the convenience store now stood. It was sold to pay for his care, as his only living family, a son, lived and worked in Tokyo and was too busy to care for him. He actually escapes from time to time to go home and just can't understand where his house is. I left the job not long after this. I knew if it happened again I could just call the police, but whenever I worked nights after this, I kept imagining I could see the old man. I was always on edge and very jumpy, and even started losing sleep over it. This was about 8 to 10 years back, so I'm guessing the old man has since passed on. I wonder if his spirit is still trying to go home.
This happened when I was working in a convenience store near a cram school. I used to work late at night, and I was known as a bit of a senior since I had more experience than the university students who worked part-time. It was a great place to work, to be honest, and I have some good memories working there. But this experience tops the list. It's not exactly a fond memory for me, but it is something I'll never forget. Our convenience store didn't get all that busy at night time, so me and the other staff members found ourselves pretty free most of the nights. We used to hang out in the back and eat and read the magazines. It was great. One night while we were doing our usual thing of hanging out at the back, I was on shift with a junior and I was checking the security cameras. I liked this guy. He was nice, and we had a good back and forth. We used to argue about movies and stuff. It was fun. The monitor in the back room is split up into 4 sections. 2 parts of the screen show the 2 cash registers, and the other 2 parts of the screen show portions of the aisles and the magazine rack. When I looked at the screen, I saw that there was a woman stood by the magazine rack. Nothing wrong with that, right? Customers come in and out all the time. However, it was different for her. Neither of us heard the entrance chime when she came in. Just for context, she had long, dark hair, and it looked kind of messy. My colleague noticed her too, and said, "Hey, I didn't hear the chime." To be honest, there have been occasions where the chime didn't ring in the past, so we just carried on talking without giving it much thought. What we usually did was come out of the back when the customer approached the register. After a while, I noticed that she wasn't moving. She just stood there like a statue. She didn't even pick up a magazine. She just stood there staring into space. My colleague said to me, "Is she planning on shoplifting?" It hadn't occurred to me, but I thought it could be a possibility. It was pretty odd that she hadn't moved. We had an idea. We were going to go out and check on her. We would go in a pincher movement, coming at her from either side, and we would make like we were stocking the shelves or dusting them. We walked right up to the magazine rack, but then we stopped, because she was gone. So we headed back to the back room thinking, oh well, whatever. When we got back to the staff room, I looked at the monitor again, and I was completely shocked to see the same woman stood back at the magazine rack. That's too fast, surely. How the hell did she do that? Was the monitor malfunctioning? We spoke about it amongst ourselves, and we decided to go out there again and check. So we headed out in the same pincher movement, just as before, towards the magazine rack. And once again, she wasn't there. How was she doing this? We rushed back to the staff room, and I for one was absolutely chilled by what was going on. I felt cold sweat on my forehead. I couldn't explain what was happening. Then we were quiet. The first thing my colleague did was check the monitor, and he told me that once again, the woman with the dark hair was gone. I was feeling relieved, and I think he must have been feeling the same. But something weird was going on for sure. I wanted to see the monitors for myself, so I leaned over my colleague's shoulder to get a closer look. "Hey, wait, don't move," he said. I just listened to him, and I froze in place. He sounded scared. I stayed next to him thinking, what the hell is this? "Just listen to me. Don't turn around." I was worried. Was he all right? But then I looked at the reflection on the monitor, not the live feed of the monitor, but the reflection on the glass, and everything became clear. I could see our faces, but there was something else. Just behind us was a figure, and I knew who it was. I could see the face of the woman we had seen earlier for the first time. I held back a scream, and I felt my back go completely stiff. We were frozen in place, watching that reflection for about 1 minute straight, until suddenly she drifted off towards the left. We stayed there for another minute, too scared to move. I tried to calm myself down, until I couldn't bear it anymore. I had to look. I slowly turned around in fear, only to find no one there. We both just backed away from the monitor in stunned silence. "Something's going on here," my colleague said, as if he wanted me to agree that he wasn't going mad. He was looking at me with these pleading eyes. I looked away from him and said, "Yeah, I agree." By the time I looked back, he was completely fixated on the monitors again, and I felt my heart sink in my chest. What the hell was going to happen next? I looked at the screen, and that woman was back. She was stood out there by the magazine rack again. She turned to face the camera and smiled, and then slowly opened her mouth. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen, especially on blurry pixels. Without saying anything, my colleague ran out of the back door, leaving me alone in the store. As much as I wanted to run out right behind him, I couldn't. I had a responsibility as the senior staff member. I spent the remainder of the shift stood out front by the register. I figured that if I didn't look at the monitors, then I wouldn't see that woman. And I was right. That was the first and last time I ever saw that woman. I was pissed at my colleague, but he apologized. It was the weirdest and scariest experience I have ever had, and I don't think I'll ever be able to explain what happened that night. I'm having some real difficulty sleeping tonight. I've been reading some scary stories, and that probably doesn't help. I read one that reminded me of an experience that I had the last time I had trouble sleeping. I figured I'd share it with you. I went back home this summer. I'm writing this in September, by the way. My hometown is really far away from where I currently live. During the journey home, I fell asleep on the Shinkansen, the bullet train. I only wanted to sleep for about an hour, but I slept for about 4, I think. I got home, greeted my parents, and after I had dinner with my parents and they went up to bed, I found myself unable to sleep. I was so restless, and I knew that the next morning we were all going to go on an important trip. I figured that the best thing I could do would be to take a walk. I hoped that the night air would help me feel sleepy. I went to the local convenience store. I got there just after 1 a.m. I went in and wandered over to the magazine rack in the corner. I was looking at the adult entertainment thinking that might help me get to sleep. It was at that point that I sensed something. I felt that horrible feeling you get when you just know that someone is watching you. I looked up to see an old man staring at me through the window of the convenience store. I thought, whoa, this is kind of awkward. There I was looking at this specialist gentleman's material, and unbeknownst to me, I was being watched. I felt that it would be even more awkward if I looked directly up at the guy and met his eyes. I did, however, take a quick, covert look while pretending to browse. I remember he had a dirty white t-shirt on, and he was overweight. It didn't look like he had washed for a while. He looked all disheveled. It was obvious that he was staring at me, and it wasn't something I was willing to stand any longer. I moved away and into another aisle. I was looking at the drinks. I picked a relaxing tea and went to the register. The clerk behind the till fixed me with a look between nervousness and the awkward. And then I said, "Hey, that guy out there, he looks a little off, right? He was just staring at me a minute ago." Yes, actually, I noticed that," he replied. "You the only one working here tonight?" I asked. Yeah, that's right." I noticed that he was pretty young. He looked scared too. I think that he must have been between 18 to 20 years old. I wasn't much older than him, by the way. I was only 24. So I said to him, "Hey, I don't like the look of the guy out there. Do you mind if I hang out in here? I'll pretend to browse, and hopefully after a while he'll go away." He looked at me like he had just been given a birthday present and said, "Yes, thank you." I guess he was just as creeped out as I was by that guy. I think I was in there browsing and chatting with the clerk for about half an hour to an hour. It started to get a little lighter out, all the while we were hiding out in the store from that weirdo. He remained out there staring in at us. At times it looked like he was deep in contemplation. At other times it looked like there wasn't a single thought in his mind. Something was wrong. A truck pulled into the convenience store's parking lot. And as soon as it did, we saw that weird guy saunter off someplace. The truck driver came in. He looked over at us and said, "Did you see that guy out there? He's out there with a goddamn knife behind his back." I was shocked and scared, to be honest. So scared that I called a taxi because I didn't want to walk home. And the clerk called the cops. I didn't realize how close I was to a situation potentially life-threatening. Stay safe out there, everyone, and always trust your intuition.
I've been living in Japan for about 3 years. For the most part, it is a very safe place to live, but it does have more than its fair share of creeps. Like, real creeps. You wouldn't believe some of the things I've seen, but I'll just say, there is a lot of self-gratification in public. This is a story of my most traumatic run-in with a creep. For reference, I am a 27-year-old female from the United States. This happened in my first year, so I was 24 at the time. I was on my way to my classroom. I was an English teacher, like about 90% of foreigners here. I was living in a small country town in the mountains at the time. Well, small for Japan. It still had quite a lot of people living in it. It was the end of summer, So around the end of August, and it was hot. I stopped in at 7-Eleven to buy a drink and to cool down a little in the store's AC. I went towards the back of the store where the drinks were. Pretty much the same setup for all the 7-Elevens around here. When I got to the drink fridge, there was already someone standing there. At first, I thought it was just a normal shopper selecting a drink, so I stood at a polite distance to let him select. It was the height of the pandemic after all. I waited and waited, but he just didn't seem to move. Then I noticed that every once in a while, he was looking at me intently out of the corner of his eye. I didn't have time for this, and was starting to get creeper vibes from this guy. So I excused myself and opened the fridge he was standing in front of, and grabbed myself a bottle of water. As I cut in front of him, I noticed he kind of leaned in, and I could hear an obvious, long drawn-in inhale. This creep was smelling me. I grabbed the closest water and rushed for the register to pay. As I was leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but fought the impulse to turn around. I got outside and continued my walk, thinking the weird encounter was over. But we all know I wouldn't be writing this if that was so. As I walked up the hill to my classroom, I heard the sound of running footsteps behind me. I didn't think too much of it. Why would someone be running up behind me after all? I didn't know anyone here. The footsteps got closer, so I moved to the side to let the runner pass. They never passed. They stopped right next to me. I looked to see who it was, thinking maybe it was a fellow teacher surprising me or even a student. I was kind of shocked when I realized who it was. It was the guy from the drink fridge in 7-Eleven. I never got a good look at him before, since I was trying to keep my distance. But now I did. There was definitely something off about him.
Konnichiwa.
He kind of mumbled out, walking uncomfortably close to me. He was tall and seemed really skinny, even for a young Japanese guy. He was all in black and with long pants and a long-sleeved t-shirt, even though it was still super hot and humid. His hair was long and over his eyes and looked poorly cared for. He was wearing a black mask, so I couldn't really see much of his face. His head was down, and he looked at me from the corner of his eye. I replied his greeting non-committedly. He then proceeded to start rapid-fire questioning me in Japanese, all in this mumbling way of speaking. Nihongo wakarimasen. I don't understand Japanese, I said to him, without really looking at him. He was really creeping me out. He hadn't done anything too bad, but he just made me feel extremely uncomfortable.
Where are you from?
He mumbled out. America, I replied quickly. This guy made me really uncomfortable, so I kept my answers very short. He asked me a few more basic questions in English, and then mumbled out.
Where do you live?
Sorry, no, I'm not telling you that.
Why?
He asked, somewhat taken aback.
We are a couple now.
What? He then reached out to try and hold my hand. His fingers were long and skinny with unkempt nails that were also long and dirty. His hand was sticky from the filth covering it, and would have been even more so due to the heat. I quickly withdrew my hand in disgust. Where he touched it felt so gross, like I had touched the inside of a trash can left out in the heat. Even though I was extremely freaked out at this point, I still didn't want to make a scene. Plus, it was a country town, so there wasn't really many people around to help me at that time of day. I started speed walking away from him as fast as I could. He made a confused noise and tried to keep up. We came to a set of traffic lights. The pedestrian cross sign was red, but there were no cars and I was trying to escape this guy, so I just crossed. Then the strangest thing happened. I heard a kind of strangled cry from behind me, from the strange guy. I took a quick look over my shoulder, and I swear I'm not making this up. He had stopped at the red light and looked visibly shocked and worried. He was pacing back and forth like he didn't know how to cross. I knew that jaywalking was frowned upon in Japan, but I didn't know it was like this. I knew the red light wouldn't hold him for long, so I took off running to my classroom. Luckily, it wasn't too far away, and creepy didn't seem to be a runner, so I managed to lose him. I got to my classroom, quickly unlocked the door, and kept the blinds closed. It seemed as though I had lost him. I taught all of my classes for the night, 3 in total. Basically, I work at what is called an eikaiwa here. That is an after-school English conversation school for kids, 3 to 18 years old. So I teach one lesson for about an hour and have 15 minutes in between to send the students off, speak to their parents, and greet the next class. Each time I went outside to speak to the parents and send the students off, I had the feeling I was being watched. I figured I was just paranoid but couldn't shake the feeling. When I finished for the day, I closed up and waited inside the classroom, which is basically a storefront, not an actual school, peering out from behind the blinds. I had all the lights off and just waited. The plan was to wait 15 minutes to be sure no one was out there. I didn't really have plans after work and figured if he was there, he would think I exited a different way if the lights were off for that long and no one came out. Sure enough, after 10 minutes, there he was. He had been hiding around the corner. I had no idea what my next move should be. In any other country, I could just call the cops, but Japan is known to ignore stalkers unless something actually happens, especially if the victim is a foreigner. I know this from stories of friends being stalked. Plus, I couldn't speak Japanese. My company's office was closed, so I couldn't call them for help. So I just planned to stay overnight in the classroom at worst, or until there was no chance of him being there. I finished my classes at 8:30, closed everything up by 9:15, and waited until 11:30 p.m. I just couldn't take it anymore. I was as stealthy as I could be leaving. I took a different route home, which was longer. I ended up getting back home by about 12:15-ish. I lived in the same town about 20 minutes away on foot, usually. Luckily, my gamble turned out good because I didn't see him on the way home. I called in sick the next day and spoke to my supervisor about transferring to a different location. Luckily, there was a teacher who had left recently, and their apartment and unit of classrooms was open, so I was set to transfer in a week. My supervisor was very kind and agreed police wouldn't do much, so he pushed to get it done as soon as possible. He even offered for me to take paid vacation until the move. I was on high alert for that week, but I made it through without any further run-ins. My company made sure to put a male teacher in that area after that. So, yeah, Japan isn't always the safest country everyone thinks it is. It's just that crimes like these don't really get reported or dealt with by authorities.
This happened when I was younger. I used to have a part-time job working for a liquor store in downtown Osaka. The area I worked in was known as the entertainment district, so I was often busy running back and forth. We delivered alcohol to pubs, bars, and certain nighttime entertainment venues. We would always be super busy around the New Year period. I wouldn't really have a minute to myself. Now, I'm not that proud to admit this on the internet, but I have a very weak stomach. So whenever I'm out, in the cold running back and forth, I usually need the bathroom. I think that should make sense. Anyway, with my embarrassment out of the way, I can go on with my story. So about halfway through my shift, I realized that I needed the bathroom, and I needed it pretty fast. Normally I would run back to the liquor store, but there was no time. So under the cold December sky, I ran around the entertainment district in search of a bathroom. Thankfully, there was a convenience store nearby. I said hello to the guy working the register. I knew him. And then I headed to the bathroom. I was shocked and appalled to see that there were two people stood in front of the closed bathroom door. They were waiting in line for their turn. One guy was an elderly-looking businessman, and the other guy had blonde hair. He was probably in his early 20s, and it looked like he was out on a night out in town. Since there was literally no other viable toilet in the area, I decided to wait in line for my turn. Whoever was in there seemed to be in no hurry to leave. We were all just stood out there trying to hide our feelings of impatience. It was taking too long. I think about 10 minutes passed, and we hadn't even heard the flush of the toilet, nor the whir of the hand dryer. It felt like whoever was in there was never going to come out. The blonde-haired guy suddenly banged on the bathroom door and yelled at whoever was in there. "Hey, what the hell, man? Are you sleeping in there? Come on. I've been waiting out here long enough." Moments after that, we heard some noises from behind the door. There was a rustling sound followed by something that sounded to me like chuckling. I guess some drunk guy passed out in there and was now waking up. I was relieved because I had a ticking clock kind of situation. 3 minutes passed, and then 5, and I was reaching my limits. I should have just ran back to the liquor store. I might have made it by now. This guy was making no effort to leave the bathroom. It was at this point I noticed something. That soft chuckling noise that I heard before was now getting louder. It grew louder by the second. Then I heard something like the guy stamping his foot in there, like it was a cartoon knee-slapping laughter fit. The laughter was so weird and so very unsettling that I forgot about needing the bathroom. I don't know if I'll be able to accurately describe it, but I'll try my best. If you told someone to do an impersonation of as many styles of laughter they'd ever heard, it would be like that. It was like mimicking. The laughter was so disingenuous and so unnatural. It was like someone couldn't decide how to laugh, or they were learning to laugh. It was very strange and just plain disturbing. I didn't think that the guy behind the door sounded drunk really, he just sounded freakish. He was seriously giving me the creeps. The office worker was staring at the door, and so was the blonde-haired guy. We all couldn't take our eyes off of the door. Then the blonde-haired guy called out to the convenience store employee. "Hey, this guy's been in there for about 30 minutes now, and it sounds like he's on drugs or something." The clerk rushed over and spoke to us to get our versions of events, and after we told him, he went off and returned with some keys. It looked like he had the master key to the bathroom. By this time, the other customers in the store were forming a mini crowd. They must have been drawn in by all the commotion. The store clerk called out to the bathroom door. "Hello, sir? Are you feeling unwell in there? I'm afraid I'm going to have to open the door now." We all watched as the clerk unlocked the door and pulled it open. I imagined I would see some guy slumped in the corner, bleary-eyed, but that was not what I saw. There was nothing in there apart from a small, really weird-looking stuffed animal sat on top of the closed toilet lid. It was small and dirty and it looked worn out. It looked so out of place. It looked like it was pretty old too, not a toy a kid these days would play with. There were no windows in the convenience store bathroom, so who the hell was in there? Where the hell did they go? All of us were left completely speechless. I don't know what the hell happened that night, and I probably never will. But whenever I tell people about this, they never believe me. And I've had the following responses. Number 1, I cannot believe that anyone would wait that long for the restroom. Number 2, I cannot believe that everyone was that patient. And the third response is pretty funny. Was it not just a Furby in there? It's funny, but it doesn't really explain why the door was locked, and all the sounds of moving in there and stamping and the maniacal laughter. Oh well, nothing happened to me, so I guess I can be grateful for that at least. It was a very strange night though.